And I recognize it knows, but I think that is that some of the culture, and that's.
But I think no, it's okay.
Oh, is it? Yeah. You're retired. Yeah. Let's go Saturday. But he has. He just wants to wake up tomorrow. That's what we're.
Yeah.
And say, well, I heard all the more do something. Now we can see the picture.
Well,
All she done is very.
oh,
No, what I'm saying is, I have walked to see it. If it's 20 years ago, yes, for us, it's occasionally doing whatever. What you do is, I know there's.
well, yeah, that was the, that was all the
Hey,
joke.
girls, look who's here. Amy's here. Welcome. We haven't seen you for there you go.
I think there's room for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, much more earlier.
Could you found your way, fortunately.
That's gonna be the roundabout. I don't know if that's a smart move.
Yeah, that's our new roundabout. 121, 36. Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a long accident.
They had the blinking light there for about 50 years because there have been so many accidents, but they did a study and it's one over the state. State of Ohio has adopted this for certain statistical intersections of risk. They're putting them in there.
Is that what they're doing, roundabout? What actually saying?
Because everybody's afraid of it. Nobody knows what to do with it.
Oh, no. That's
The worst thing is because you're going the wrong way and you just can't make yourself do it. You know, I come to it, I never drive it. I come to it and think, now we'll do this. Well, we don't do this, we do
Maybe
that.
next week, a chance.
The nice thing is, if you miss your turn, you can go around again and hit the right.
Yeah, I still get the biggest stuff.
Obviously, a sheep.
That's,
Yeah, that's a sheep.
oh my.
So considered to have neighbors that mow their yard during church. Particularly when you have a church with no air conditioning, you have to have the doors open.
It'll be quick, it's a small yard.
Yeah. I don't think it'll interfere with us too much anyway. Welcome to First Universalist Church of New Madison on this first truly sweltering day of summer. The first day we really noticed they don't have air conditioning, so the fans are on. Dress lightly and don't worry about it. There are hand fans, I think, still over computers. Do we have any announcements?
Just to remind everyone that next Sunday, July 3rd, we will be gathering at 10:30 at the El Dorado Park to join the El Dorado congregation. And we did that last year, had a good time. There'll be a brief worship service, and then, of course, we'll get on with our carry-in dinner, bring your favorite dish or whatever. Our church is going to be providing coffee, orange juice, and cups, I believe, and table covers. And they're providing table service and anything else.
I've got 2 table covers down there now that I picked up on sale. Actually, they're July 4th flag covers that I found somewhere on the discount. So, if 2 is enough, should be. I think last year we had 2, and maybe we had 3 tables.
I'll bring a few extra just in case.
they don't usually do a carry-in, they usually provide their stuff. You're more than welcome to carry in. I always bring something, it's just a tradition for a potluck.
They put that in their announcement, so I'm sure that they would welcome anything you bring.
And as usual, for a potluck, something you really like to have, bring it yourself, that way you're sure you're gonna get it. And unfortunately, when you bring something good, you never have any extra to take home again. That's the sad part. So, July 3rd, next Sunday, 10:30. If you get there early, it's not a problem. And don't go to the church, go to the park.
That's right.
There's a pavilion in the park, a shaded pavilion. It worked out real nice last year. So,
And in the event of rain, proceed anyway, because it will be held at the church. So, and you pass the park on your way to the church, so you will know which exact place it is if there should be some rain.
it's not a very big town, so the church is easy to find and the park is easy to find. Okay, anything else? Are we planning any board meetings anytime soon?
Yes, and I wanted to talk to the board members here after the service and look at a meeting plan so that we can prepare for our annual meeting, which we need to hold at some point next month, possibly the third Sunday. But we'll announce final details on that later.
Okay, so we'll be talking to people after the service today, and we'll announce that at the board meeting. And anybody is invited to be on the board. There's a shortage of members, and you don't even have to be on the board. You're welcome to come to the meetings and voice your opinion. And actually, if we can figure out how to do it, we usually have a phone tie-in where you can be on the phone with the office type deal where you can speak and hear what's going on during the phone call. So don't let being at home keep you away from the board meeting. We're trying to set direction and pay attention to what's going on in the here and now and in the future. Anything else? Okay, prelude is summertime. How appropriate.
Summertime.
Can't you practically feel the sweat dripping off that song? Chalice Lighting is a Fire in the Universe by Sean Trapp. Our chalice reminds us of that the fire within ourselves is the same fire that illuminates the universe. It is our reminder that all is connected, even though the space of the void is vast and our experience here is just a blip in the cosmic timeline. This flame is our promise that in our smallness and our short time on this earth, that we live intently and deeply with love for one another, with honesty and integrity, to be guided by rational thought and critical thinking. and then with a sense of shared responsibility. For as the late astronomer Carl Sagan reminded us, this pale blue dot is the only home we've ever known. And along that line, our topic this week is endangered. It started out endangered species, and it kind of grew because I had it planned for 2 or 3 weeks ago, and then something happened, and then something else happened, so it just keeps, like the jellyfish, it just keeps expanding out and out and out. So, our picture, if anybody recognizes it, Margaret has done this, pen and ink. I had no idea that she was such a talented graphic artist. We have the print that Mike has made in the back if you want to take a close look at it. Truly a fine work of art, and we're glad to have that here. So that is an endangered turtle, and that's what we're starting with. Okay, our opening hymn is 207, The Earth Was Given as a Garden. Bestowing, bid our waste and warfare cease. Fill us all with grace overflowing. Teach us how to live in peace. Would that it was so. All right, our children's story. Well, actually, let me show you this first. My wife is a real fan of manatees. She even went to Florida where her parents lived their final years and went swimming with manatees, which was the experience of her life. She really enjoyed it. And so I put this up in her honor. If you can't read it, it says, "Hi, my name's Hugh, and I belong to you all. Just here to remind you about your shared humanity." So there you go. All right, our children's story is Dive from my favorite place, the Storyberries. Copyright free for use. Nice Australian accent, and we'll see how long it takes to bring it up.
Dive by Rajiv E.P. Esturi. Blue skies and calm waters A perfect day for diving. We set out in a little boat, hoping for a big adventure. When we reach the dive site, we carefully check all our equipment and put on our fins and masks. As soon as we are underwater, we are greeted by a school of yellowback fusilier. There are so many different creatures to see around this large table: coral, oriental sweetlips, parrotfish, batfish, and even a beautifully patterned nudibranche. The trumpetfish changes colour to try and blend in with the school of yellow tan, but can you pick him out easily enough? It's a good thing we kept a safe distance from this lionfish. The spines on his back can be quite poisonous. These clownfish carefully guard their sea anemone home, but finally agree to let me take a few pictures. We see a honeycomb moray eel having his teeth cleaned by a cleaner wrasses, and another pair even offer to give us a scrub. There are triggerfish and sea urchins. We even see a coral grouper and a reef octopus playing hide and seek. The octopus wins the game. They're masters of disguise. Pipefish are great at disguise too. Can you spot the two ghost pipefish in this picture? We come across a couple of white-tipped reef sharks resting near the bottom. They're pretty harmless, so we swim in for a closer look. We follow this hawksbill turtle for a while as he looks around the reef for a nice sea sponge to lunch on. As we make our way back to the boat, we are thrilled to see a manta ray flying through the water with two remora fish in tow. And just when we think this dive couldn't possibly get any better, we sight a dugong grazing on some seagrass. What an incredible experience! I can't wait to go diving again. Corals are both plants and animals. Thousands of little algae live inside corals and give them energy to grow. They have hard outer skeletons and grow into many different shapes. Plankton is the main source of food for many sea creatures. They are a mix of algae, bacteria, tiny animals, and the eggs and larvae of larger animals that float about with the ocean currents. Feather stars may look like plants, but they're really animals. They use their feather-like arms to catch and eat bits of floating plankton. Parrotfish have strong teeth that form a parrot-like beak, which they use to scrape algae off hard coral. Some species don't mind eating bits of coral as well, and they later poop out a fine bit of sand that washes up on land to form beautiful white beaches. Clownfish and sea anemones live together and help each other. The clownfish help the anemones by cleaning their tentacles and luring other fish for the anemone to eat. The anemones, in turn, allow the clownfish to hide amongst their poisonous tentacles without stinging them. Cleaner wrasses are small fish that keep bigger fish clean by feeding on their parasites and dead skin. The bigger fish recognize the wrasses by their colours and the dance-like way they move. The reef octopus can hide by changing its colour and texture. It makes its home in holes on the reef or buries itself in the sand. Ghost pipefish can be found in pairs, floating with their heads down and hidden among seagrass, corals, or feather stars. Like the reef octopus, they can change colour to blend in perfectly. The white-tipped reef shark has a thin body, broad head, and white tips on its dorsal and tail fin. They hunt at night and sleep through most of the day. The hawksbill turtle has a flat body, a shell with jagged edges, and a sharp curving mouth that looks like a hawk's beak. Manta rays are huge fish with wing-like fins on the sides of their bodies. These large fins help them swim gracefully through the water. On some manta rays, the distance from one wingtip to the other can reach up to 23 feet. The dugong is a vegetarian marine mammal. Its favourite food is seagrass, which it is able to graze on with its specially shaped snout. Dugongs are also called sea cows. The end.
Dugongs have another name for us. It is the same animal, the manatee. I think it's called the sea cow pretty much anywhere you go. And that's because of the way it looks and what the sailors thought it was when they saw it. They also called it, that was the inception of the idea of mermaids at sea, which that's a pretty strong jump from a manatee to a mermaid. But if you've been at sea for 2 years, probably anything that has a vaguely human shape could be a mermaid. So, the other thing I noticed about Storyberries is they're pretty strongly into poop. If you remember last week, it was last week or the week before, we had the monkeys flinging their poop. And this week, when you're lounging on the sand in Florida, that crystal white sand, just remember it's what the parrotfish have pooped out. That's what you're laying on, is parrotfish poop. All right, joys and concerns.
We want to remember Roberta Feldman, Roberta and her family. Her sister Betty Lou Johansson, her husband John Johansson passed away, and so that's why Roberta's not here today.
Okay.
John Johansson, and John Johansson spoke here a number of times at our church, and so we express our condolences to Betty Lou and her entire family.
Right. Our thoughts were with Roberta, as she attends that funeral today. We never want to forget, and we will do this every week for the probably foreseeable future. Our sunflowers are for Ukraine. Things are only getting worse, and maybe better and worse. It's hard to put a name on it. They're getting more armament in the United States, longer range rockets and missiles, which enables them to strike Russia at a longer distance, which only prolongs the war. But given the choice between prolonging it to save their independence or ending the war and losing their independence, it's hard to say. That I can't say that I would choose to surrender and end the war, because that would be a really terrible outcome. Anything else? The shootings continue. I can't even begin to name, if you watch the news, every day there's another shooting, 2 or 3 people from somewhere. The Ohio legislature has seen fit to let everybody carry a gun in Ohio now, a concealed gun. You don't even have to tell the officer if you get stopped for any reason that you have a gun unless he asks you, which I'm sure they're no dummies. Well, one of them did shoot himself a couple weeks ago, which kind of tells you an example that a sheriff's deputy with 20 years of experience can accidentally shoot himself with an empty gun. How safe is it for people to just go down to Rural King or Tractor Supply and buy a gun and start carrying it on the street? It sounds to me like a recipe for disaster. Anything else?
I think we want to wish and express our concern for peaceful protesting, despite the contradictory messages of at least 2 of our branches of government, the executive, or legislative, and Supreme Court. There's lots of contention currently, and that's likely to be considered in the future. And let's hope for peaceful protest and hopefully working some solutions, possibly over time, for all parties involved.
And that is a concern that kind of leads us into the message. One of the things that's endangered is women's rights. For 50 years, women have had the right to control their own body, what happens to their body at that time. And now the government is telling women what to do. It's telling them that you have to be an incubation chamber for 9 months or whatever the amount of months, no matter what the condition of the fetus. And things, it's interesting, Clarence, the Supreme Court Justice, mentioned that because this 50-year-old precedent has been overturned, there's no reason not to overturn other precedents, including same-sex marriage, which I picked up what I guess people call swag. Scott is the LGBTQ plus whatever all the letters are, representative in Dark County. I met him in Greenville, and he handed out a bunch of, there's like wristbands, flags, posters. If anybody is interested in supporting the trans or LGBTQ community, we have the information here. And we want it to be known that this church does support people's choices, no matter what they are, as long as they are legal and ethical and moral. But anyway, Clarence Thomas questioned whether same-sex marriage may be overturned. He questioned, what was the other one? What was it? Birth control, a major one, birth control. Some states are saying that abortion is banned from the moment of conception. That is going to change all kinds of things. The one thing I noticed Clarence Thomas did not mention was miscegenation. That was only decided in the 50s, that blacks and whites can marry. In case you aren't aware, Clarence Thomas is married to a white woman, so he may have to divorce his wife if he proceeds down this passage.
He wrote that as a separate opinion, however, and the good thing is, at least the other, what was it, 4 or 5 conservative justices did not go on that opinion. That was a separate opinion he issued in connection to overturning Roe v. Wade.
And I was eminently reassured by the fact that these 3 brand new justices swore on the Bible that they would not overturn this, kind of like they swore on the Bible that they wouldn't overturn a 50-year president. And of course you have the Republican senators from Maine saying, somebody, she didn't say lied, but what she meant was, someone misled me when they said they wouldn't overturn this, Susan Collins. So, when they're telling you that they aren't going to come after same-sex marriage or any of these other things, I would put as much belief in that as I did their prior statements of what they will do and will not do. So, democracy is not easy, it's not free. You have to work to keep it, and that's kind of the direction we're heading in. Okay. What happened to the rest of my papers? Oh, there they are. All right, we're going to go all over the board on endangered. One of the first things that's endangered is land ownership. According to the land report of 21, Bill Gates and his family have 242,000 acres of farmland. 250,000 acres of farmland in the United States is owned by one family or one person. In addition to that, they have almost 1,300 acres of recreational land and 25,000 acres of land that is in transition. Transition in the land report and in any other description means farmland that is being turned into condominiums, apartments, shopping centers, whatever else. So when the people of Clark County tell you they don't want to see farmland put into sun-gathering areas where solar farms will be done, they should be more afraid of Bill Gates, I think. What brought this up was Bill Gates bought a $13 million potato farm in North Dakota. It turns out North Dakota, if you remember back in your 30s and 20s and 30s history, used to be a state, North and South Dakota, a state of declared independence for the small farmer, the small business person, the free-voting individual, and did not like wealthy, rich people who told them what to do. How they ended up flipping into a GOP state, I'm not exactly sure, but North Dakota still has a sanction on the books that trusts, estates, companies cannot own farm ground. It's to be owned by individual farmers. So, because Bill Gates Trust owns this $13 million potato farm, like 7 or 8,000 acres, we're going to have to find out where the people of North Dakota, where their loyalty actually lies. Are they going to stick with the party that is selling them out, or are they going to stick with their fundamental beliefs from the 1920s and 30s? Okay, next one we go down the line. Endangered in the United States is children. They are being sacrificed almost weekly and definitely monthly on the altar of the Second Amendment. There has been a movement to try and interfere with this, which I was not aware of. It's called a merchant code. Anybody know what a merchant code is? When you buy something with a credit card, there's a merchant code that goes along with it. If you buy food, whatever the code is, there's a number that says your credit card was used to buy food. There's a credit card number, merchant code for clothing, for automobiles, for tools, for gasoline. There's a merchant code for everything except armaments, ammunition, and guns. One of the larger banks, which I had never heard of, it's like a finance bank that finances MasterCard and Visa and Discover, said Why don't we start a merchant code for armaments? Why? For one example, remember the guy who killed 100 people in Vegas with the machine gun at the top of the hotel? He spent $94,000 in the 2 months prior to that. $94,000 spent on ammunition, guns, tactical suits, armament, body armor, all of the things that you would think you would have to play Army. This has been the case. The 18-year-old that killed the people in New York spent, I think, $18,000 in the 2 weeks before. He bought 2 of those rifles at a couple $1,000s each, plus he bought tons and tons of ammunition, plus he bought body armor. If he had been flagged by a merchant code, everybody would know that somebody is out there spending thousands of dollars. Now this doesn't say if you go buy a box of 22 long rifle shells to hunt rats in your backyard, that's not going to show up. But if you're spending thousands and thousands of dollars, there's going to be a flag on your name. That is the only one that the government, that the Congress is blocking a merchant code for. They have not been able to get that through, and it's not a big deal. So, another endangered species. Let's go on to the next one. We've talked about this, and the Ukraine seems to be the meeting point between Russia and the rest of the world. The first time this happened was right before World War II in 1933 and 34. Does anybody remember the famine that took place in the Ukraine when Stalin said he wanted to collectivize the farms of the Ukraine, which is one of the most productive breadbaskets in the world? And at that time, all the farmland was owned by individual families, like kulaks. They collectivized that, threw those families out, and basically eliminated 3 million people starved to death in the Ukraine because the Russian army came in and confiscated all their food, took everything. The same thing is happening now. The Russian army is confiscating the wheat harvest, the sunflower harvest, the oats harvest. All the harvest that Ukraine had stored in their silos is either being burnt, blown up, or transported back to Russia. And starvation is once again imminent, not only in Ukraine, but as we mentioned last week, Ukraine supplies most of the rest of the world, India, China, Africa, South America, with grain subsidies, with grain that's used to feed starving people, not only purchased by their countries, but purchased by the United Nations and used for food aid. I think we mentioned last week that Sudan, the UN has stopped providing food to Sudan because they can't get the food out of Ukraine. They can't get the wheat out of Ukraine to make flour and to send it places. So one man, Putin, is starving thousands and thousands and thousands of people around the world again for his own ambitions. All right, to bring it closer to home, now we're into the Great Salt Lake. Let me show you. This on your left is the Great Salt Lake 5 years ago. That's the size of the expanse of the Great Salt Lake in Utah. If you can see it on the right-hand side, it is down that much last year, 2021. The Great Salt Lake is drying up because of the drought going on in the western part of the United States. The Colorado River is dying up. The Lake Powell that supplies the water for Southern California, supplies the water for Nevada, supplies the water for Las Vegas, actually supplies the electricity for Las Vegas, is critically low, and people do not seem to realize it. When you have the President of the United States complaining about having to flush the toilet 10 times or how no water comes out of his shower and saying we should go back to large flow toilets and as much water as you want to run out of your shower, they are basically putting their head between their legs and kissing their butt goodbye. We are running out of water, and this is going to have to be addressed. Great Salt Lake is a good example, and it is not just the lack of water. When the Great Salt Lake dries up, the surface dries into dust. The Great Salt Lake and many of these small lakes out west are concentrators of heavy metals, of poisonous alkaloids. And that stuff settles out of the water and goes into the dust. When the wind comes and blows the dust, it blows it into people's lungs. It becomes atomized, and people can actually inhale it through their lungs. So people who have problems initially with asthma are even in more danger after these dust clouds begin to descend on them. That is something that's being studied now. What they've tried to do in California in some of the lakes there is they actually send water trucks out to dampen the surface to keep the dust down. They've tried putting gravel and dirt on top of the lake to bind the dust up. They've tried plowing it. They're trying everything they can because in California they realize the danger that these sedimentatious dust clouds cause by the drying up of these lakes. It's a problem of the future that is only going to get worse. Not only the lack of water, but also the lack of electricity and the lack of, because the water power is what generates the electricity, and the problem of the dust that comes off of it. All right, a little history of the Great Salt Lake. It's the Pleistocene lakes in the Great Basin of Western North America, and it shows the path of the Great Bonneville Flood across the Snake River. If you remember, probably a year ago, we talked about the flood out west that carved the canyons through the Dakotas and into Washington, into Oregon. These huge canyons, almost a mile deep in places. There was a huge wall of ice built up after the glaciers, and when that ice wall broke through, huge amounts of water came through and carved out almost like little mini Grand Canyons on the western coast. The Great Salt Lake is a remnant of a much larger prehistoric lake called Lake Bonneville, and you might remember Bonneville Flats, where they do the race cars in Utah. At its greatest extent, Lake Bonneville spanned 22,000 acres, nearly as large as present-day Lake Michigan, and roughly 10 times the area of the Great Salt Lake today. It reached 923 feet deep at its deepest place and covered much of present-day Utah and small portions of Idaho and Nevada during the ice ages of the Pleistocene epoch. Lake Bonneville existed until 16,000 years ago, when a large portion of the lake was released through the Red Rock Pass in Idaho, resulting in cataclysmic floods. With the warming climate, the remaining lake began to dry, leaving the Great Salt Lake in Utah. Dust danger, heavy metals, and minerals in the dry lake are blown by the wind, and that's what causes the problem. The people of Utah have realized this, but they have not been able to consolidate and create enough, a majority vote, to do anything about it again. Once again, the mindset that we don't pay any attention to science, science is our enemy. The mindset that the past is always better than the future, the mindset that nothing is going to change, will be the end of us if we can't do something about it. Now, we'll go on to the manatee. Manatees need warmth to survive. As a subtropical species, the Florida manatees are vulnerable whenever the water temperature drops below 68 degrees. And it's hard to believe in this warming era, but if you remember, there are cold snaps when conservatives will tell us it snowed, so there is no such thing as global warming. Even Florida has problems when the orange grows, when you have a freeze. That's enough to cool the water enough that manatees are in a dangerous position because of that. Even though they look huge, that is not fat. Manatees do not have a layer of insulating blubber like seals or whales. That is basically all intestines. That giant size is intestines because manatees eat grass. They're like a cow or an elephant or some animal that eats vegetation. It takes a lot of digestive area to digest something like grass. There's not a lot of nutrients in it, so there has to be a huge bulk of it go through and come out again. They're round and chubby not because they're fat, but because they have such large digestive tracts. To survive cold periods, they seek shelter in the warm water refuges such as natural springs, the outfalls from power plant cooling systems. At the end of January, nearly 800 manatees were huddled together in the outfall of the Florida Power and Light at Cape Canaveral Clean Energy Center in Brevard County. And I like the Clean Energy Center. It's a nuclear power plant. So in one sense it is clean, in the other sense maybe not. Such havens used to offer abundant food, But now, with so much of the seagrass gone, there's almost nothing for manatees to eat. We mentioned that last week. Manatees eat seagrass, just like cows or elephants or any other herbivore. Seagrass is being killed because the population of Florida is putting fertilizers on their yards. The farmers are putting fertilizer on their fields. It is washing into the lakes and lagoons. The sewer systems in Florida, they don't have much of an underground filtering system. It's almost all limestone, which is why you see collapses where they have sinkholes. That does not filter the sewage, so when you have a septic tank, it pours into the water or into the subsoil, and that goes into the water table, and that flows out into the sea and into the lagoons. That fertilizes the algae grows and shades out the seagrass dies, and when the seagrass dies, so do the manatees. Over 1,000 died in 2020, and we're already at 600 this year, 700 I think, so we're already well on the way for another 1,000 this year. There are only 5,000 to 6,000 manatees total in Florida, so 1,000 lost every year would decimate the population in no time at all. All due to man-made intervention. Now that's not the only thing that kills manatees. Manatees spend a lot of time on the surface just kind of floating and breathing, and they're run over by power boats, slashed up by the propellers. Manatees have an interesting skin structure. When they're scarred up, it turns white instead of the brown that their normal skin color is. And that's how they identify manatees in Florida. They take pictures of their backs and photograph the propeller scars on their backs, and that's how they're identified. It's like pinto horses or Holstein cattle. You can tell by their markings, only these markings are artificial that kill them many times. At Cape Canaveral, an unprecedented emergency feeding effort is underway. Normally, feeding wild manatees is prohibited by state and federal law, but with so many animals at risk, wildlife officials have chosen to intervene. Since December 7th, the staff has been throwing heads of romaine lettuce and cabbage into the water for the ravenous sea cows. To prevent the animals from learning to associate humans with free meals, they do this hiding behind tarps. In other words, they put a tarp over the edge of the boat and then just throw the lettuce and the romaine and the cabbage over the boat for the sea cows to eat. Think of that. We are feeding manatees lettuce, which is doubled in price even up here. Okay, rescue teams from the staff, the Wildlife Fund staff, are standing by, ready to swoop in and net and haul out manatees in need of medical treatment. The stricken animals are trucked to rehabilitation facilities such as SeaWorld and Zoo Tampa's Manatee Critical Care Center. Last year, the influx of manatees was overwhelming. In anticipation of another perilous winter, SeaWorld, which had 28 manatees to care for in late January, is building 5 additional rehabilitation pools for up to 20 more. At Zoo Tampa, the work of the critical care team seems endless. The supervisor of animal care said, patients include orphan calves, victims of cold stress, hunger, pneumonia, and injured by motorboats. After feeding 2 bottle-fed toddler-sized babies, the caretaker guides to a young male named Flapjack in a medical pool. He lies blinking in the sunlight as a plastic tube is inserted through his nose and into his stomach to deliver a nutrient-rich mix and various medications. When Flapjack arrived last October, he was so emaciated that the caretaker thought he might not make it. After more than 100 days in intensive care, he's plumping up again. If he makes a full recovery, he'll be released back in the wild to start the circuit over again. Manatees, like their closest living relatives, elephants, have sharp memories. Because they're known to visit the same waters throughout their lives, rescuers are careful to release each manatee where it was captured. If that's not possible, because the sites are now food deserts, manatees are rewilded where vegetation is abundant, such as Blue Springs State Park in Orange City. As more manatees succumb to starvation and cold weather, a coalition of conservation groups, including Save the Manatee Center for Biological Diversity, is taking legal action. They filed a lawsuit against the Fish and Wildlife Service, accusing the agency of failing to expand critical habitat. In their complaint, they say the agency acknowledges the need to revise and update the habitat, but they failed to do so. The lawsuit is intended to push the agency to push for more control over the loss of natural warm water refuges and poor water quality that causes algae blooms and the loss of seagrass. They are trying to push the agency to control the outflow and the inflow of fertilizer, waste fertilizer from agricultural and grass, people's lawns. Restoring seagrass beds is crucial. Conservationists say it sustains not only manatees, but also fish, shrimp, crabs, seahorses, and turtles, as well as human economies based on tourism, fishing, real estate, and recreation. Unless pollution is reduced and seagrass is restored, manatees will continue to suffer and die. The seagrass issue is not going to be solved anytime soon. The way we're going, maybe it's never going to be solved. So who is responsible for saving the manatees? Who's responsible for saving the sea turtles? Who's responsible for saving the honeybees? One person or the collective will of the populace. Government sets the rules which determines the interaction between humans and the animal, the human-oriented world and the animals in our world. For Rachel Carson and Eagles, it's sea turtle season, which means that the residents of Florida towns have to turn off their lights and close their blinds. That is done by regulation. Regulation is imposed by the government. The government is people that we elect. So I still debate in my mind are the things that happen in our civilization due to the flow of civilization, and it doesn't matter who the leader is, nor is the leader crucial. In other words, when Stalin came, was that inevitable that someone like Stalin would basically starve out the kulaks and cause 3 million people to die? Or if Stalin or Hitler had been excused from human existence, would that never have happened? I don't know. I mean, it's a question that I still ask myself. All right, we're back to sea turtles now. From May 1st to October 31st, between 40,000 and 84,000 sea turtles nest on the Florida beaches. The turtles dig a hole in the dry sand in the middle of the night, lay eggs, cover the holes, and return to the water. The incubation period is 2 months, and artificial lighting is a huge threat. Thousands of hatchlings die annually due to artificial lights, which is why residents and visitors are told to turn their lights off. Why are artificial lights dangerous for sea turtles? When they hatch in the daytime, they go to the sun over the sea, the light, and at night, if they hatch, they're drawn inland. They're going the wrong direction instead of going out to the ocean. Florida has 5 sea turtle species, and all are either endangered or threatened. According to the Federal Endangered Species Act, the green, leatherback, hawksbill, and Kemp's Ridley turtles are endangered, while the loggerhead turtle is classified as threatened. It's illegal to threaten, to harass, to kill the eggs or the hatchlings or the turtles. They are amazing creatures. Many of them spend their entire lives at sea except when they come ashore to lay eggs. An interesting fact, green sea turtles are green because of what they eat. They eat primarily algae and seagrasses, so their cartilage and fat is a greenish color taken from the color of the grass. They lay their eggs in a nest. They dig in the sand with their rear flippers. This clutch of eggs is called, the group of eggs is called a clutch. They usually lay between 100 and 125 eggs per nest and will nest multiple times about 2 weeks apart. As soon as the eggs hatch, the hatchlings dig out of their nest. This process takes a few days. Once they emerge, tiny turtles hurry to the sea to make their way offshore in the open ocean. As you may have seen in some of the nature shows, seabirds, animals of all kinds, it's like a smorgasbord out there for them. There's thousands of little sea turtles trying to get to the ocean. They're being picked off one by one. Sand temperature is very important. The sex of sea turtles, like many other turtles, is determined by the temperature in the nest. Cooler incubation temperatures produce more male hatchlings, and warmer temperatures produce female hatchlings. The temperatures that fluctuate between the two will produce a mix of male and female. Sea turtles are deep divers and can stay underwater for a huge amount of time, as many as hours. And they are air breathers. They have to have air, but they can stay down as many as 8 or 9 hours. Turtles are also deep divers. They've been seen at 4,000 feet, which is the Marianas Trench, which is deeper than whales even can dive. That finishes us on sea turtles, and I want to talk a little bit about fireflies. How many of you, when you were kids, put fireflies in a jar? How many of you have seen enough fireflies to put in a jar in the last 10 years? If you go outside at night now, you'll see 1, 2, 3. I counted like 30 last night, and they were like here and here and here. When I was a kid, and I admit this is a long time ago, you could scoop them up with your hand. There were clouds of them. And put them in a jar, and you keep them in the jar for 5 or 10 minutes or an hour, take them in the house and put them in a closet and watch them light the closet up. Then you come out and let them out again. Fireflies are amazing creatures. They are beetles, and they are another symbol of what's happening to our world around us. They are disappearing. They're disappearing because of pesticides, because of loss of habitat. Nobody really knows, and that's where science has to get off its stick and get to work. But the trouble is, even when science tells us what the problem is, we don't seem to be able to muster the courage or the initiative or the well-being of these other creatures to save them. That is something we have to work toward. Okay, they're from the Coleoptera family. There's more than 2,000 described species, and many of which are light-emitting. The soft-bodied beetles are commonly called fireflies, lightning bugs, or glowworms because of their conspicuous production of light, mainly during twilight to attract mates. Light production is an honest warning signal that the larva was distasteful. And also, that's what a lot of people don't realize. The reason fireflies light up is not only for mating, it's also to warn birds and other predatory insects that it is a firefly, and fireflies, the material that makes the firefly luminescence, bioluminescence, is toxic to other animals. So they quickly learn not to eat a firefly, not to eat anything that's glowing, because it will kill you. It originated as a warning signal that the larvae were distasteful, and this was co-opted in evolution as a mating signal for adults. Curiously, some of the groups are like praying mantises. The female will actually eat the male, which is kind of interesting. You flash a light at her, and that's it. You're toast, so to speak. They're found in temperate and tropical climates. Many live in marshes or wet wooded areas where their larvae have abundant sources of food. All known fireflies glow as larvae, and only some adults produce light, and the location of the light organ varies among species. They go into the whole production thing, which is pretty interesting if you have a scientific bent. This occurs in specialized light-emitting organs, usually on the firefly's lower abdomen. The enzyme luciferase acts on the luciferin in the presence of the magnesium ions, ATP, and oxygen to produce light. I love the name luciferase. Where do you suppose that comes from? Everything comes from the Bible in England. Everything comes from the Bible in English. Luciferase, the thing that creates fire, is from Lucifer, the devil. So I'm not going to go through all that. They give you the wavelengths, 510 to 670 nanometers. Adults emit light primarily for mate selection. They have a variety of ways to communicate with mates and courtship. Sometimes they, in groups, particularly in Japan and the Philippines, all of the fireflies will synchronize. And these places where they still have masses of fireflies, where the pesticides and human intervention hasn't intervened too much, you'll have thousands and thousands of fireflies blinking on and off all at the same time. That would be, I couldn't find an example of that to show. If I can, I'll bring one up later. That would be pretty interesting to see in itself. Okay. Any questions or comments on our brief but quick tour through the endangered species? There's like hundreds of endangered species. I only named a couple that I had seen, and started out with the turtles because of Margaret's drawing. Naturally went to manatees. I couldn't pass up the Salt Lake as an example of what's happening out west. And then I was out last night sitting on the porch and watching the fireflies, so I threw that into comments.
I think some of the challenges of this being looked at as a competition between motivation and incentive, because there are conservationists and like-minded individuals here who want to save something, and those that profit through our system, capitalistic system, want to make money. So to grow a better crop leads to nitrates, nitrogen-based fertilizers leaking into the water that will technically ruin a community, as in Saline, Grand Lake, St. Mary's. But the motivation is not to stop the farmers or the economic conditions. It's more allowing those limited numbers of people that are concerned about endangering go about their way, and possibly a whole species may be preserved in a zoo or an aquarium, but life does go on in our capitalistic system.
And science can give you the answer. Do you have something?
I'll share this afterwards, folks, if you want. But I saw synchronized fireflies.
Oh, did you?
Last summer. There's small, there's big famous areas in the U.S. There's small little areas in Pennsylvania. In fact, it's this week and next week. And so I guess I've learned a lot about fireflies. I have seen them. I know there are things, there are initiatives in towns, like don't mow your grass in May,
Right.
Don't break the leaves for goodness sakes.
Yep.
Because that's how all the fireflies, they need all that time in the spring. Because they hang out in the ground for what, 17 years or something before they
That's the
hatch.
cicadas, but fireflies
Well,
they overwinter.
But they were 11 years, it's a long
Yeah.
time that they live underground. And so there are some synchronized
In the United States.
in the United States.
Keep your phone handy and take a video so we can see it.
You know, I do, I'll send it around from the local newspaper last week. It said like, there's a state forest area, like let's say north central PA or something. I think we kind of keep it a secret too.
And yes,
This is, and I'm saying it because I see these signs here. This is maybe not directly related to what you're talking about, a little bit more indirectly, and that's with energy. And I see these signs that says no solar panels and heat pumps. I wish people, I don't know who's put that out, that it's been shown that if you a lot of the crops that is grown around here, they do much better if you're in shade. And they just raise these solar panels out. There's no solar panels, start ruining farming because it's complete horsepower. Raise up the solar panels, your crops will grow a little bit better because it's not direct sunlight. And there's a big protest about that, and I just wonder where it's coming from. And the other thing is with the wind turbines, they are not, as our former 76 12-year-old said, they are not bird graveyards. Has anybody seen a bird flying in the woods? It's got to dodge a big propeller.
no.
So, and this is really because to generate energy, we do things that cause our lovable, wonderful, needed animals to tap into systems. So keep that in mind. Yeah, listen to science. I've been in science a long time, and people in science just don't get what else on the profession. The direction is to make things better. You can't stop at the solar panels, you have to keep going. You can't stop at wind turbines, you have to keep going, you can make it better. And at this moment right now, they are not detriments to farming, they are not detriments to birds. They actually can help with some of the crops growing. And
Science has the answers if people will listen. The new iteration of wind turbines is what they call a vertical wind turbine.
yeah.
Instead of having blades that go like this, the wind turbines go like this, like an actual turbine blade. They can put more of them in a denser area, and the problem with the ones with the propeller blades is they create turbulence behind it. So every wind turbine behind every wind turbine is 10 to 15% less efficient. With the vertical wind turbines, there's no loss of efficiency whatsoever, so you can jam them in as close as you can get them. They also definitely do, there are occasional bird strikes, and nobody will deny that, but there's nothing like what they call a mass death extinction. But there's even fewer bird strikes with the vertical wind turbines. So science keeps making progress. Dairy farmers, not actually turkey farmers, chicken farmers, If you spread your manure on a grassland or on a seeded plot of ground in the middle of the winter, you don't get near the runoff that you do if you throw it on bare ground in the spring or the summer when a big rain comes along and washes it off. You can knife it into the ground. The newest thing for dairy farms, and the government is helping subsidize it. You create biodigesters. All the manure is scraped into a big pit with a big tent over it. As it ferments, the methane gas comes off. You catch the methane gas and use it to power a diesel generator to produce electricity. Some of these large dairy farms, which I hate 5,000 cow farm because none of those cows has a name, but they are producing, and that's every one of my 100 cows had its own name and we knew it. Every one of those farms that has those giant digesters produces their own electricity. They don't take any electricity off the grid. They burn the methane, and then they dry the sludge, and they compost it, and they spread it on the field as dry sludge, not the stuff that washes away. So there are answers. It takes investment, it takes money, and it takes intelligence, and it takes perseverance, but it can be done. But we can continue to be our own worst enemy, and I don't know what the answer to that is. And that's what we're trying to do here, is figure it out. So if anybody has any suggestions, let me know. Okay, offering. Brother, can you spare a dime? Sweet June days. Let's experience those together. again. The birds are on the wing, bright anthems in their merry stream, unconsciously they sing. Oh, how our cup o'erbrims with the good these happy summer days. For all the joys of field and wood, we lift our song of praise. It may have been written in the 1800s, but the sentiments are still with us today, even though the language is a little archaic. It's fun, but still archaic. All right, Extinguishing the Chalice, Go Forth in Simplicity by Samuel A. Trumbore. Go forth in simplicity, find and walk the path that leads to compassion and wisdom, that leads to happiness, peace, and ease. Welcome the stranger and open your heart to a world in need of healing. Be courageous before the forces of hate. Hold and embody a vision of the common good that serves the needs of all the people. And our postlude, rainy, what is it?
Here's that rainy day.
Rainy day.
Maybe later.
What's that?
Maybe later.
Oh, okay. Maybe later today, we could use some. All right, that concludes our service for First Universalist. Hope you have a good week. Remember the Ukrainians. Next Sunday, remember at the El Dorado, 10:30. If you don't have food prepared or you forget, just come anyway. There's plenty of food there. There's table service there, everything you need. I have ice water there if you want to make lemonade today. I stopped at Eikenberry's because I was picking up a mower at Layfields. And I hadn't been to Eikenberry's for a long time. They have ready-made Texas tenderloins in a package. So instead of me going to the fair this year, I'm going to make my own Texas tenderloin at home. And they also had some leftover donuts, so we get our cheap donuts are from Eikenberry's instead of Kroger's.